Cuban DNA results. What's a Cuban? So I tested with Ancestry DNA. If you're wanting to go to the results right away, I'll leave you a timestamp right now. But stick with me so I can give you a little background, and then we'll go right to the DNA results. So I was born in Miami. My folks were born in Cuba, and naturally I carry over their DNA, and they carry their folks' DNA and forefathers and so on, and it just goes back in time, right? So what's that all about? Well, we'll see. Let's look at what Wikipedia says just to put things in context. So Wikipedia writes, the majority of Cubans descend from Spaniards. Despite its multi-ethnic composition, the culture held together in common by most Cubans is referred to as mainstream Cuban culture. Never called it that, I've never heard it, but a Western culture largely derived from the traditions of Western European immigrants or migrants, beginning with the early Spanish settlers along with other Europeans arriving later but in much smaller numbers, such as the English, the French, and Italians. There is a West African cultural component which has been somewhat influential, with many Afro-Cubans also being of Jamaican and other Afro-Caribbean origin. So that's what Wikipedia says. Just so it's, so there's people from all parts, and kind of like the U.S., you see people from all parts. So I've been doing family tree research, ancestry research, and I've been doing that for about a year. Now, there's a lot of family oral history, and as I have done my research and collected documents I would never have thought that I would come across, they match, for the most part, consistent with the oral history that I was taught by my parents, grandparents, and so on. But the DNA did throw in some surprises. Not great, but some surprises that, oh, really? It makes you think. In the case of my direct line, my parents, both parents born in Cuba. I was born here. My two parents born in Cuba. My grandparents one was a Spaniard, and the other three were Cuban. So I have 8 great grandparents, right? 5 were born in Spain, 3 in Cuba. The Cubans were born specifically in Matanza, Cuba, Cienfuegos, Cuba. And for the Spaniards, that was Santander, Cantabria, Spain, and Malaga, Andalusia, Spain, and then the Canary Islands, Spain. So that makes up my great grandparents. And so those geographic locations continue on going back. But as you further go back, at least in my case, it becomes a little bit more difficult to document, all the details of these people. And it's just a work in progress. So I have certain lines that I can trace completely, others not. And that's just how it goes, right? I do want to mention that one of my great grandparents is of Sicilian origin, family history, oral tradition, but it's something so known throughout that I just don't have the documentation of that person. There's a whole story with that, but supposedly Sicilian. And let me continue here. So to wrap this bit up, Cuba is a multi-ethnic culture, just like the U.S., but in Cuba, the base sort of starting point, European origin is Spain. So that's its base. Whereas in the U.S., British as a base, and then a multitude of ethnicities and people from all that comprise the country. So it's kind of the same thing, except the different bases, right? You have a base starting with Spain and the other one with, say, British. Last bit before we go to the results, by doing the DNA test, and I did it with Ancestry, you get, and all these sites that you see, most of them, I'm sorry, you'd have to do the research to see which ones, but they offer you a matching results where people that have taken it, that are in their system, their data system, they'll match you, and you can see how many, the numbers of people that match with you at whatever level of DNA. So there is it's a jaw-dropping thing to see how many people one is related to, be it how far distant or whatnot. They all branch into a common person at one point, be it a brother of a great-great-grandfather or just a direct line. And you see that with the percentages of DNA. It's an interesting thing. So you even get that. sometimes those things can unlock your family tree where you're missing a name, and by hook or crook you can arrive at the answer to that missing sort of person in your tree. So my ethnicity results are 43% Spain, 26% Portugal, 22% France, 6% Italy, and 3% Ireland and Scotland. So to me, the Spain result makes sense since this is the oral history handed down from my father and grandparents and mother, and it just goes on, and it's just like one of those things that's as obvious as can be, right? So 43% Spain, I kind of anticipated that completely. Now, I didn't originally expect Portugal because, well, I just didn't consider it at all, but it's the Iberian Peninsula, and it does make total sense to me. So now I do not have a known ancestor within five generations that can be traced and say, oh, they are Portugal born, but it would have to be somewhere down the line, or at least common heritage, so that I don't know. But long story short, it's Iberian Peninsula. And so Portugal was a surprise, but then thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, well, absolutely, totally makes sense. Now, with that said, so the same little thing occurs with the other results, where I'm like, oh, really? But at the end, it makes sense. Except Italy, which I have that one connection with a great grandparent, and so there's that oral tradition. I just can't hammer it down, but it's in the DNA, so it must be from there. Can't prove it until one connects the actual documentation, but you know that it's in the DNA there. So there's that. And then the France, 22% in with the French portion. And, I'm figuring that this may be from the French Basque people, because just, along my paternal line, that comes from the north of Spain, from my father's line, grandfather, and so on and so forth. And it's right there hugging that region where it goes right up into France. And there's the French Basque people and all that. So I don't see a problem with. Now, it's pretty darn high, 22%, but just the same, it's probably, who knows if it's lumped in with Spain, or it's separate because it's bad. We can't say, but there it is. I don't have, other than one great, I think it's great grandmother through my direct line that has a particular name of Meyer. But that goes into a whole, and that's direct lineage on my tree, but that's what it is. So I have to do further research, but there's that. And then we have the 3% Ireland and Scotland. Okay, there is Celtic connections with. You could research that. It may seem like a strange thing. You always think, of Spanish origin. At least in the Americas, there you have to take things historically into consideration. There's lots of testing DNA wise, and I've read a lot. I don't have the literature so good that I can spout it off, but there's Celtic connections. So to from Spain to the British Isles. So, not really surprising, to be honest with you. And it's 3%. So there's that. So if you're of Cuban ancestry and have done one of these DNA tests, leave the results down there if you'd like to share. If you have any questions or want to tell a story, feel free to do so. I hope that you guys enjoyed it and that it's useful for you. Subscribe if you'd like, and I'll catch you guys next time.